Allisyn, the first thing I want to start with is what's new and exciting in your life.
Beautiful. Yeah, so I just came from the Science and Non-duality conference last weekend, which was really beautiful. It's a great gathering of people from all over the world speaking about non-duality and also science and quantum physics. You know, it's called From Quarks to Love. So it was really beautiful.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, combination. And yeah, it's just been really great. I'm going to be at Odyssey in not this coming weekend, but next weekend at 1440 University.
I was just listening to the Ram Dass podcast this morning, and Raghu Marcus, the host, is always plugging 1440 up there near Santa Cruz. It's one of their sponsors, and it sounds like such a dope place. Have you been there yet?
Yeah, no, it's going to be my first time.
Cool.
So I'm really excited, and it's a great meeting of innovators and different leaders.
I feel like I need to be your sidekick, because you tell me about these conferences I've never heard of, and I'm Mr. Conference. The hell?
Yeah, there's a lot of
your
different
Instagram is traveling with light.
Traveling light machine.
Traveling light machine. Yeah. So follow her. Obviously, that's goes without saying. But that's literally what you do: is you travel around and share this technology and experience with people. Yeah,
I'm the U.S. trainer as well, so I give trainings, both in the U.S. and internationally. And I have worked with the Lucia Light for over 6 years now. And initially I was doing a lot of traveling. So that's kind of where the Traveling Light project came out. And now I'm doing, I keep saying I'm going to ground, but I'm a Pisces. I'm like double water signs over here. So the flow keeps taking me to new adventures. But I'm working now on actually making a whole online learning platform for people that are working with the light and involved with the light. And I work with some other healing technologies as well. But yeah, a lot of the work that I do is traveling around, sharing experiences, holding space for people to have really beautiful, expansive moments in their lives. Which we just had. It makes it kind of actually a little difficult to podcast. I'm like so chilled out. So you guys, we just had a session up in my bedroom. Me and Ashley, and Allison was our pilot, and we just took off into the stratosphere for what seemed like 90 minutes. And then I came out and asked you, and I think you said that was around 35 minutes. Yeah, we did the 2 like little demonstration sessions, and then you stayed in for about 35 minutes. Yeah, it felt like a really long time, but in the sense also that you're not sitting there going, oh, I wonder what time it is. I'm like, time means nothing. Your body's not even really there anymore. You're just having this completely inward journey, and at the same time kind of an out of body experience. So normally when I do a podcast, I feel much more alert and kind of hyper and nervous, and then I start to settle down as we go. So this is kind of the opposite, where I feel like, I don't know, man, do we really have to talk? Let's just chill and meditate, but that would be a really boring podcast. So this is the opposite, where I'm going to ramp up my energy with my Candor matcha latte here. So when you went to this non-duality, kind of science meets spirituality conference, was there anything new and exciting that you discovered there that I should know about? Well, there was a lot of different things that were really interesting. Actually, one that I was pretty fascinated with is about the Kaduma Institute. So it's all about like luminal states of consciousness in between lives, and kind of understanding duality and non-duality. So that was really fascinating. I would check that out. And then, and it's also kind of related to Kabbalah. Really? Yeah. Wow, that's an interesting tie-in. Yeah. And then I also went to some like quantum physics talks, and even to like a Dionysus lecture. And that was really amazing, because it's actually talking about women in the cult of Dionysus, and how, like people get to these states of ecstasy. And, I'm all about kind of using different methods, mostly without any kind of substances or entheogens, but really to like what takes us into these kind of expanded states of consciousness. And they used to actually go up to the hills and drum and do this shamanic drumming and really get to these altered states. And they had such beautiful experiences, and they really like communed with the earth, that it really started taking off. And this was back in Greece, and and so it started building, and it turned into like almost a cult. And they called it a cult in the masculine written version of it. But it was just really fascinating because it actually became so popular that society almost became divided, and they were so threatened, the kind of masculine leadership at the time, by this like uprising of connection and expansion and like really open-heartedness, that they suddenly decided that, like they put everyone on trial and killed people, and people were fleeing the city, and anyone who was convicted was killed. So that was...
And what's this called again?
That was Dionysus.
Dionysus. And is this a practice or movement that's still in existence, or was this a historical retrospective?
Well, Dionysus is a Greek god.
Oh, I don't know that.
And so I
know Isis, like the bad Isis.
Someone actually said that recently. It was funny. Someone was like, I saw Isis in my experience, and someone else was like, Isis? And like, no, the good Isis. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no.
Like, no, the goddess,
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, that's Egyptian
I'm not
goddess,
up on my Egyptian, Greek mythology, all that stuff. I'm very ignorant.
Yeah.
So
anyway, but yeah, lots of
was that the thing you were telling
things
about earlier that was like harnessing the orgasmic feminine power or something, or was that a different thing?
No, that's a different thing.
Oh, okay. Tell me about that. That sounds really juicy.
I was just talking about kind of getting into the transpersonal state and kind of doing medicine work. And, we were speaking of ayahuasca and these kinds of ceremonies that people are on. And often, it starts with the internal process. And then at certain point, actually in more ancient society, in Egypt and things like that, they would actually have women coming together and orgasming, and it would be for a collective goal or experience. So I was kind of speaking more to like ancient tantric practices of using energetics in more of a transpersonal way.
I just had to find a way to tie that in.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like oming, oming?
Yeah.
Yeah, orgasmic meditation. I've done a podcast on it, guys. I forget the number. Actually a couple with this guy, Eli, really great guy. Became a buddy of mine, but I went and did like the Om training, which basically involves, if you could say, like a non-sexual clitoral stimulation. I mean, it's like, it doesn't escalate into sex, but it's kind of like...
Yeah. Like a continuous stimulation to move energy.
Yeah, and there's a very set container, and it's actually strangely kind of not pervy. But anyway, it's another podcast. Go back and look, orgasmic meditation. But what I found so interesting about that, and I did practice it here and there a bit after that, but what was interesting about it is it's about creating this energy field of just unbridled feminine energy. And so that's why it's not really, it's a sex thing, but it's not. It's more, it really is kind of a different type of meditation that elicits that energy, kind of using the woman's body as an instrument, and the ecstatic feeling that they're experiencing creates an energy field. I was thinking kind of in the room, but on a quantum level, I guess you could say, with enough people doing practices in the tantric nature, that there is perhaps an uplifting of consciousness in general, having the opportunity to amplify that energetic field.
Totally. Yeah, it's really, it's fascinating. And that's, I think the thing about Tantra, and a lot of people really just equate it with a type of sexuality that's really a limited view, kind of from the modern standards, that's like you said, pervy or some, kind of sexual in that sense, but actually it's energy, and huge fields of energy can come together. And it's really interesting too, because like a lot of people say that, like the CIA made feminism, what it is, because actually the divine feminine energy is very inclusive. And when women come together, it's not about being anti-men. It's about rising up and creating this beautiful field that's really open and inspiring and can really expand in like this epic way.
That's so funny that you brought that up, because I'm a big conspiracy guy. I love those. I mean, they get dark and it gets kind of depressing at one point, because once you start finding out the ones that are true, that are really dark, it really sucks. But at one point I was looking into the origins of I don't know which wave it would be, second wave, whatever it was, after World War II, when feminism started to rise. And obviously there needed to be a balance of power. And so the timing was right, but there are documented pieces of evidence that some of the main activists and proponents of that model, of that mindset, were put in place to divide the family, and namely to have two heads of household that could both be taxed.
Yeah.
And so when all the men went off, those brave soldiers, to fight in World War II, he had women left at home, and these women started to generate revenue, and the government was like, oh, sick. Now we're getting taxes from wifey. When the guys come back, their ass is going to go back to work. We're going to get taxes from those.
Double workers. Right?
Yeah, so there was kind of this underground clandestine move with the guise of doing something really cool, which is obviously creating equality. Anyone with half a brain cell knows we need that.
Yeah.
But I like what you're saying, because there are elements. This is totally off topic, so whatever. That's funny. We record. I was like, well, we're talking about one thing, so we'll probably only do an hour. But this is how it goes. Yeah. But as a male in this incarnation right now, and I don't even think of myself as a man, I think of myself as an alien from some other dimension that happens to be in a body that has male genitalia and a endocrine system that makes me act and do certain things in a certain way. But from the male perspective, a lot of the messaging in feminism that's out now, and thankfully there's some really healthy feminism that's coming out, is like, fuck man, they're assholes, like it's an adversarial relationship. And I always think that's so short-sighted, because as a man, and any guy I know that's halfway conscious would agree to this, that a woman who's consciously embodied in her feminine is such a magnetic, powerful force that you can get the masculine to do anything, including become more conscious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to become more compassionate, kind, loving, less rapacious, less domineering, less controlling, less destructive on the environment, war, all that, right? Like really all it takes to get men to be cooler is to embody your feminine. And we just like bow down and worship that. So I want to say to your more, aggressive, hateful feminists out there, it's not going to work, because
it's just another type of control and competition, right?
You can't fight darkness with darkness.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look around, like when I'm in a city, I look at all the shit that's been built. You look at train tracks, and you look at street lights, and there's an airplane going overhead, and skyscrapers, and concrete, and electronics, and everything you're looking at, for the most part, that's part of physical material manifestation. Not all, but the majority of it, just because it's the nature of masculine to build shelter and to build culture, society, industrialization. You look at like, okay, this is mostly built by men, right? Why do they do that? These dangerous jobs, going up and like building skyscrapers, and, going to war, and being in the military, and law enforcement and firemen, like all of those activities that make males kind of disposable. They're quite dangerous, and they work their asses off, and they die younger from hauling concrete and doing all the shit they do. And it's like, I look at that, I go, why do we do this? It's for the feminine. We're driven by biology and by nature and evolution to provide that structure. Yeah. And if the divine feminine wasn't there, guys would just sit around and like jack off and eat Cheetos. Like we would not, like, honestly, we would not get anything done or build any societies or do anything productive, like make automobiles and computers and all the things that, males typically dominate in, for lack of a better term. So anyway, totally weird tangent, but it's your fault. You got me thinking about it with your comment. Yeah. Because it's true. But I mean,
we can bring it back, because we can think about how, the masculine and feminine is kind of working together, right? It's energies that are, instead of looking at it, this is the whole like non-duality concept, right? Instead of both the duality exists and the non-duality of the combination of both. And we don't need a society or a way of life where we're trying to do everything, It's like the same thing if you're always in this constant action. What about being? If you're just doing, what about being? What about bringing your nervous system back to the parasympathetic, which is what the light's all about, right?
Well, you got that right.
We want to be active doers and, entrepreneurs and CEOs and answering all the emails and doing all the things. And, I see it myself, go to the conferences and meet the people, but it's so important to find that balance, right? The more feminine aspect in our lives too, where we really take the time to nourish ourselves and to let go into these, deeper states of relaxation, so that we can, when we rise back up into action, we're ready, we're prepared, we're there, we're clear. It's like some of the best ideas come from this space, and the hypnagogic light is what we call it. And that hypnagogic or liminal space is between being awake and being asleep. And that's where so much creativity comes from and so much openness. They say Albert Einstein used to actually sit and he would hold something out, and then basically he would try to fall asleep. And as he was falling asleep, eventually he would drop it. And when he dropped it, he would wake up. And in that, falling asleep space, some of the best ideas and most creative aspects come from. And, we were talking about it even in the experience, when you're really focusing on something and trying to control it or trying to get something, you lose it, and instead of like going with so much action, if we just step back into that state of being, of receptivity, of openness, that's when some of our best ideas and understandings can really come through. So it's not one of those,
that's beautifully said,
amp you up technologies like matcha, but it's it's one to bring you back down.
That's beautifully said, because it's like I think as a guy and many of my guy friends that are also pursuing spirituality and more fulfillment, when we first get into it, we're like, oh, I'm going to meditate the fuck out of this. You know what I mean? It's like we use that very yang masculine energy of like, okay, how does this work? I'm going to figure it out. Then I'm going to execute. I'm going to dominate. I'm going to get it done. And it's like spiritual unfoldment is yin. The only yang part of it is perhaps just, a flutter of desire, like, wow, I'd like to have more peace or more balance or whatever you're looking for. But through technologies like the one we're about to dive deeply into, and meditation and prayer, it really does put you in that yin state of allowing. And I think it's a really cool sign that now so many men are becoming conscious and, going. I remember when I first started going to yoga 20 years ago. I mean, it was kind of dope, but I was always the only guy in class, I was like, oh, word, this is where all the ladies are. I actually was not that guy that went to yoga and tried to pick up girls. I don't think I've ever met a girl. I was bad in other ways, but not in yoga class.
Okay.
But then over the years, point being, this is a hilarious conversation, by the way, so far. But over the years, I was like, oh, now there's 3 dudes, now there's 5 dudes. And especially like in Kundalini yoga, when I first started doing that, maybe 8-9 years ago, I mean, there'd be a pepper of like 3 of us in a room of 70 people. And now there's like almost, maybe not equal, but it's probably 60-40 now, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Men are starting to realize that to achieve their objectives, even in the outer world of like, optimization and performance and achievement and making money and building and doing and raising money for your family and goals and all of that you're much better at doing that if you do take those breaks to find balance with the feminine and allow yourself to surrender into that present moment awareness.
Absolutely.
Because that's where, as you said, the true insights come from. And, I just did a crazy ass meditation last night, as I was saying. Man, I figured out my whole life in 2 hours. I was like, oh, all the dots are ding, 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 all connecting, It was like a Goodwill Hunting kind of equation situation, like, and it just all became very clear. But that wouldn't have happened if I sat down and was like, all right, I'm going to write my goals and I'm going to get it. Yeah. There has to be time for that. So I appreciate that perspective and the way that us male and female embodied people, and even people that are embodied and they're in a male body and are completely more identified with their feminine and vice versa, that we can all start to work with these energies and become aware of them and work in harmony and in union to support each other. Yeah. And that, I think, is really the key to societal structure and success on the macro and on the micro in our interpersonal relationships, to be able to weave in and out of those consciously and know what energies we're working with and become more kind of energetically intelligent.
Absolutely. And I think it's like finding the balance both within yourself and what feels good to you in terms of, what direction you're kind of leaning towards and really, using your power in, and then how we all come together and dance in those different dances together, And as you said, you might be in more masculine at one point and then move into the feminine in a different relationship or a different role. And I think society is becoming more fluid in that way. And that's really powerful.
It is. Hot damn. Well, we're off to a good start. So this is maybe 2 years ago. I'm thinking, because it wasn't last year's Paleo FX. It was the year before, and that usually happens in April in Austin, Texas. And I, like you, I love the conferences because it's a place where you get consolidated brilliance, right? You can go in there, just every person you meet is doing something amazing if you're at the right conference. And I was upstairs there. I was just done an interview, and I'm upstairs, and I see this dude who has a tiny little booth, no real signage. It's not like a big bulletproof coffee, you know, it's just real low key dude. And he has this a round light that's about maybe 10 inches in diameter, and it's on kind of an arm that reaches out over a gravity chair, and it's just flashing these kind of sparkly white light, and there's someone under it looking like they got the biggest shit-eating grin of their life. Just a real lit up looking person laying under this light. And I walked by, I was like, that's, you know, why is that person so happy? What's going on here? That it doesn't look like anything special. It's just a flashing light. So that person left, and I talked to the guy for a second, and he said, I got a long waiting list. And so I got on the list, and he told me what time to come back. And I came back, and he explained it to me briefly. This is the Lucia. It's kind of number 3 or something. Is that Lucia number 3? It's from Switzerland, blah, blah. Austria? Okay. So,
close.
Yeah. So at least I remembered what year I was there. But so I get into the light. He's like, how used to psychedelics and, kind of altered states are you? I said, very. I'd love to get more used to them. Turn it on the highest setting for as long as it goes and let me do this thing. So he did. He gave me a pretty full dose. And, when I do something, it's like, why? I don't want to ramp up. Just give me the whole thing and then I'll tone it back. That's always, rather than ramping up, I just ramp down once something's too extreme. I don't advise everyone do that. It's not the smart way to do it, but it's
your way. Yeah.
It's my way. So anyway, he puts me on this thing, and it was like within 5 minutes, I was on ayahuasca. I mean, that's the closest thing I can equate it to. These geometric shapes, just the visuals, these light shows, this kaleidoscope effect, just completely insane situation that I had no control over. And, I didn't try to. I just really surrendered into the experience. And as it started to come on, so to speak, I was like, okay, cool. I know I'm safe. It's impossible that this could hurt me as far as I know. And I just went into it. And then what happened was my heart started to really open. And I just became ecstatic and so full of love to the point where I was kind of tearing up and just smiling and just having the best time. And I did not want it to end. And that was my introduction to this technology. So I got the guy's card, and he's based in Austin. And, I was like, guys, who's in LA? And, I went kind of down the rabbit hole of trying to find one of these things here that I could use. And lo and behold, eventually found the website or something and got connected with you. And you came over a few months ago. We just hung out. You let me try the technology here at the house. And I had another incredible experience. And so, this thing is I'm just obsessed. It's so amazing because unlike, taking an entheogen, there's preparation that needs to take place before set and setting. You really want to have a guide, and you are a guide when we do these sessions, clearly, but it's much more of a commitment. And then afterward, there's a much bigger aftershock. And when I do a medicine, I feel quite sick and I don't want to walk or drive and I have to kind of lay down. And it's just much more kind of, there's side effects to it, I think is what I'm saying. And I think the interesting thing about this is, other than just feeling really relaxed like I have been now, the only side effect is just like, wow, I really just kind of feel like relaxing and sitting around. Don't feel very yang and proactive. So I want to know about your very first experience this 6-some years ago when you had the Lucia light experience. What happened to you?
Wonderful. So yeah, that's a good story myself. So years ago, when I first tried the Lucia, I was actually in graduate school for international education and development. So I was kind of on a different path, and I was kind of upset about all of that, but that's a whole nother story. And yeah, I was in a really rough spot. I was actually going through some pretty intense PTSD. So anyone who's experienced that, the nightmares and intensity, waking up with like sweating chills, and then you don't want to sleep, so then you kind of get depressed, and it's like it all kind of rolls into each other. And so I'm one of those high functioning people that no matter what the circumstance, I'm like, I'm fine, I don't need help, I'm fine. I can do this. So I was kind of powering through regardless of how intense everything was getting. And a dear friend of mine invited me to try this light at an art gallery. And I had no idea what it was. And, I was like, come on, man, it's like hard for me to even leave the house right now. I don't have any money. There was like a million excuses that I had. And then, right at the moment when I, had to make the decision to go or not, I just got this push, like, you have to go. And I was like, okay, I'm going. And I went running out the door and just made it on the train. And it was in London at this art gallery. And so we went in there. And again, I had, no expectation. It was an art gallery. He said it's something about like neurovision or something, and I was like, well, that sounds interesting. Like, I'm interested in neural art, and I like brain things, so I was like, intrigued, but I had no expectation. We were waiting forever. It took like a lot longer than expected, and when I finally got under the light, I was like, okay, let's just do this, and I was amazed, in those first couple minutes. Same thing happened to me. I just started smiling. I was like, what is this? It's making me so happy. And they're like, do you want more? I'm like, yes, yes. And then like more intense, yes. And I just went to the most intense, and my eyes were actually like really fluttering that first time. And I almost at one point just like held my eyes shut, like, just stop, like I'm trying to just like experience this thing. And then I went into the longer session, and that's when it really became magical for me. I relaxed enough to like let my eyes go. And I actually went straight through all the colors and patterns a lot of people see, and straight into a very, ayahuasca type experience. I had a visitation with my father who had passed away. And when he kind of passed, a lot of the PTSD stuff came up. So it was really beautiful to connect with him. And, he like told me like, it's okay to be happy, like, and like kind of unlocked some keys in my heart that I had been holding a lot of pain around. And I just was flooded by this sensation, and I was in a forest, and, I don't know, all these things. And I'm like, I forgot where I was, what was going on. And, it kind of ended, and I was like in this tent in London in an art gallery, and I was like, what is going on? And they're like, how was your session? I was like, I can't even talk right now. I just went running outside, and it was raining in these London streets, and I was just dancing in the rain. It was just like, I felt like I had like come back to myself. And anyone who's experienced PTSD, it's kind of like there's a wall of glass between you and the world. Like, you're trying to communicate, but like you like try to explain, it's just not the same. I just don't feel the same anymore. You're kind of out of your body. And it just like snapped me back into my body. And this isn't for everyone. Everyone has a totally different experience. But for me, it was a life changer. I mean, from that moment, all the dreams went away, like all the nightmares. I slept through the night for the first time in 8 months. And I felt like myself again. And wow, it was definitely still a journey, and like, something that I really, remind people in the process of this is that, there's no pill that solves anything. It's like, yes, I had this experience that moved my nervous system essentially back into the parasympathetic, which I was resisting so hard, which really helped me be able to deeply relax. And the kind of expansive psychedelic state also really helped me connect with a part of myself, that I really needed to like find again, and ease something in my soul by connecting with my father. But also, after that, it was like, there's still work to do. It wasn't like, okay, you're done. Like, everything's good now for the rest of your life. You're enlightened. It wasn't one of those experiences, but it really essentially brought me back to the space where I could do the work. And I was, excited to do it. And my energy came back, and I kind of got out of the depression and started becoming a, creator. Like, I like talking about the creatorship and how we can step into that state in our lives where we're, consciously manifesting what we're bringing forward instead of reactively responding. And yeah, so it moved me back into my creatorship position, and yeah, it was exciting. I started making better choices, and, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm like, what is this thing, And so I went back and tried it again, and it was very colorful and patterns and things, but I didn't have anywhere near the same depth of experience in a certain sense. But also there was just this peace that came, and that of understanding of, it felt like there was almost something there, like a spirit or energy that I was kind of connecting to when I was in the light that was beyond just like light bulbs. It felt like really deeply connective for me. And then my personal journey was that I started dreaming about the light machine all the time.
No way, really?
Yeah. And I've always been pretty like intuitive and, psychic stuff or whatever has kind of come through and more in my life. But I often have kind of, prophetic dreams for myself. And so when I started dreaming about it all the time, I was like, okay, I can't ignore this. I was giving like groups of people, like all these different things. And I'm like, come on, I just finished my master's degree, like trying to do this work. And and it just kept calling to me. And it seems to be kind of what happens to certain people. They just kind of hear the call, and then they, people will try it. And then years later they come back again and they're like, I'm still thinking about that light. And I'm like, it happens like that sometimes. So yeah, that was really my journey. And at that point, there was only like one light in the US, and they're definitely not cheap. It's an investment, an energetic investment. And so I was really overwhelmed by all of that, but I ended up actually being able to get the one that was in the US, buying it from him used and making payments. And I had already...
Oh, dope.
Yeah. I mean, but it was one of those manifestation things, I was like, I knew it was going to happen. I was in my creatorship. So even though I was being turned down by banks for loans and, all of the traditional like things, everyone was like, are you crazy? Like, you just got a master's degree. Like, like this light is so expensive. What does it even do? It's just a light, like, come on. Like everyone was against me. My own mother was like, is it going to give people cancer? So it was a really like, there was a lot of resistance in the rest of my world, but in my heart, there was nothing but knowing that it was going to happen. So I just went ahead and made a website. I did everything that I could do. And then, that was seen by the universe. And when he saw my website and heard my story and everything, he was like, okay, let's do this. And didn't do a background check or anything, and just start like, send me the light. And I started making payments. And so it's been, an epic journey since then. In the beginning, I didn't really I was kind of trained that someone should be with me and a few things like that. But, I probably didn't follow any of the instructions in the beginning. I'm pretty head on into things as well. So I was kind of finding my own way with it. Scared a few of my friends by really throwing them into the deep end without warning, and, learned a lot of lessons along the way. And in the end, ended up developing like a whole like training manual and ways of different working with the light and helping people kind of find their own way to work with the light. And, it's been a really transformative and growing journey. And I've been so grateful to meet like so many just incredible people along the way, like connecting with soul family. And we have a beautiful community, and it's a real gift. It's a real gift in my life in every single way. And, part of my thing for me personally was like, I was studying international education and development. My whole life, I've always been like, I'm here to serve. Like, what can I do? Like, I'm supposed to help, and it's like the suffering I went through myself. I was like, wow, I just like don't want people to suffer, like, how can I help this? And, so kind of my impulse to do international education development, education was like a huge thing in my life. It was something really steady and secure and positive. And then, I love traveling to other places and seeing other cultures and things. So I was like, wow, if I can, work with this. But then I, as through my own evolution, I'm like, I'm not sure about educational systems. I'm not sure about these big NGOs. Like, I have a lot of questions about donors and donor priorities, and like, and it was like very entangled and political. And, I really came to this understanding that, like, for me, what I understand the best way that you can help anyone, because you can't really help anyone, is to just hold space for them to help themselves, is to see them, to see them and acknowledge them, and really be there as a witness to their experience. And so that's kind of what the light is really all about, and how we hold it. It's like, we're not healers. Like, you're the healer. Everyone's healing themselves, and it's really, as a guide in the light, it's really holding space for people to have this incredible experience. And it's whatever they experience is a reflection of them, and it's different every single time. And it's like a tuning fork of your consciousness, so it really brings you back to that center. And so I've seen people really depressed with no energy who come out like, just like, yeah, this is a new life. Like, I'm just ready, And then I've seen people who are so overworked. I've seen doctors who just fall asleep like the second it turns on, and rest is important. And, like, sometimes we prioritize like, oh, I want to have a shamanic journey over rest. But your body knows what you're ready for. And so the light's really giving you what you're ready for. And that's what I really love about it too. It's like a reflection, it's a recalibration. So it's not, forcing you into something. And that's kind of a difference, you compared it to ayahuasca. And one of the, first of all, it's not an entheogen. So you're not taking anything inside your body that's really messing with your neurochemistry. But also it's, and ayahuasca has a beautiful spirit, Mother Aya, and that works with you as well. And I believe that the light really has guardians, I would say, etherically, energetically. Really what it's about isn't saying like, I need to do this to have a deeper understanding. It's saying that deeper understanding is already within me. I'm just shining a light on it to remember. And it's literally a light that you turn on and shine on yourself to remember. So that's kind of what it's all about. It's like remembering. We already have all the answers for ourselves. We already know. We are eternal beings, and we're multidimensional, and we're acting in so many ways, and time is quantum, and it's all happening at once. There's no past or future. So, the more we can kind of come into that eternal presence where we're healthy and whole and everything is, then the more we are in our creatorship, and it's beautiful. So that's what the light is really all about, and that's my personal journey and introduction with it.
Before that rainy night in London 6 years ago, when you had your initial experience, had you experimented with psychedelics?
A little bit, but not really. I actually I was more of a nerd and intellectual growing up. And like I said, school was really like positive for me. It was like, oh, you did a good job, good work, it was like really positive reinforcement. I was like, this is great. And I was always reading books and I was having, I had different kind of astral experiences and stuff as a child, but I wasn't really into drugs, as I called it, and I didn't really differentiate between psychedelics or any like harder drugs. I was pretty against all of it, because I really, alcohol is probably one of the worst ones. So I was drinking some alcohol, but I didn't really do much in the way of psychedelics. The light, in a way, actually, right around that time started opening me more to being open to those types of experiences.
And so since you had that experience with the light, did you become curious about other inner cosmic journeys using, what do they call it? Is it entheogens?
Entheogens.
Oh, I always say entheogens. My psychonauts are going to correct me. And sometimes people leave a podcast review and they're like, dude, you pronounce this word wrong all the time. Here's how it really goes. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to sound as smart as possible on my podcast.
Could just be an accent,
Yeah. After that, though, were you like, oh, wow, the doors of perception have opened. I wonder what happens if I do a clinical dose of MDMA, or I go do ayahuasca or wachuma and all the things that are available. Yeah. I think right now it's really very interesting because you have, again, like you're talking about the non-duality conference where you have this merging of hard science and the shamanic spiritual world, right? And like a guy like Joe Dispenza is kind of doing a really great job of merging that. But in terms of psychedelics and just expansions of consciousness, you have the clinical psychedelic movement in the world of psychiatry and the psychotherapeutic model. And, obviously, which MDMA kind of originated in that, even LSD back in the beginning. But then you have a convergence of plant medicines and shamanic medicines, your peyote and ayahuasca and all of this kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting time. I'm very excited about these two worlds kind of colliding and there being, a loosening of the legality around some of these things and more education and more open-mindedness from the academic, medical, scientific community, finding the value in the other side of it, which is more tied to the natural world. So have you since become interested in either side of those explorations? Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, I should say, I was in England and I did experience some MDMA, but it was more in a like party situation, and it just left me I felt more empty. It was like kind of, you would have like an experience of connection in that time. And then I remember even trying to talk to some of the people that I had felt like I had this incredible connection with the following week. And it was like they didn't even remember, and I felt really lost. And that's actually how I really still feel in terms of looking at these, sacred medicines as that, it's a sacred experience when you're expanding your consciousness, and you really need to, have some awareness around that and intention if you want it to be really productive for your life. I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want. You don't need to do anything, but I am, I live in Colorado, and I have a lot of friends experiencing psychedelics, and I've done a fair amount of psychedelic exploration myself. And I was really lucky in the beginning, my first, kind of deep psychedelic journeys with LSD and psilocybin, to have friends who were real guides, who really prepped me and like, okay, let's talk about this beforehand. This is what might happen. Like, this is your safe place to come back to. One of my dearest friends was, this is the blanket. This is everything safe. We have everything we need here. So if anything ever happens, you can always come here. And like rooting, doing things like that are so important. And, I think it's beautiful to explore your consciousness, and there's so much in our subconsciousness that's so rich and telling and healing, and potential there is just incredible. But I also am really praying for the community to have some more education around ways that this can be used, because I mean, even marijuana to me is can really be abused if people are smoking every day and really doing it kind of unconsciously and just kind of addicted to being in that space all the time. And then their field is wide open, and, and it kind of has its own agenda that can really slow down your life. So there's just, it's really important to say like, yes, these are great. And I'm all about, expansion of consciousness and really passionate about that. But I also am really passionate about psychedelics being used in a way that's respectful and of both the plant medicine or, whatever type of medicine it is, and then also of the person who's experiencing it. If you're at a party and you're just woo and drinking a bunch of alcohol and all these things, like really bad things can happen. I mean, even on the, it's a little more on the woo-woo side, but energetically, like you can get entity attachments, like all kinds of, dark spirits. Your field is just wide open. The people you can attract, the situations, I know a lot of friends, and I've even had experiences myself where I wasn't really in like a very clear mental space or feeling really safe or nurtured during a psychedelic experience. And because of some of the things that went down during that 12 hours of intensity, I had years of work to do to release some of the things that happened. And I know a lot of people that have had that. And I really feel like that was the fall of psychedelics before, it got really out of control. And so I'm really, calling forward the leaders, the people who are psychonauts, who have had these experiences, who have been through the healing, to step forward and share more ways, to hold space, and then also to integrate those experiences. I have experience with all kinds of different entheogens, not a lot of each one, but I've just been curious to try out all these different experiences once my mind was open. But I've really found that, and from seeing so many people and working with so many people with the light, that, the integration is what matters. So again, it's like these peak experiences can be really like beautiful and opening and telling and learning. But if we don't integrate what we've learned, then what are we doing? We're just chasing the high, and that's not going to get us anywhere. That's not going to get us more present. And I've seen communities where people do ayahuasca once a month or, quite often, and just keep coming back for more, just show me more. And it's like, wow. I mean, I've done ayahuasca, like 2 or 3 times in my life, and that's a lifetime lessons right there. Right. Like one night you're like, whoa, like I'm going to be integrating that for like years, and I think that's really taking it to that next level. It's like, it's fun to explore. It's beautiful to open up. There's so much that can be done. And this time, everything's accessible. I mean, people are sharing things with me all the time about different experiences that they're having and, comparing it to later, doing these things. But I think it's just really also important to just kind of really bring it back to that center point and not, get lost. And there's a way to totally do way too many psychedelics. There's people who are kind of lost in idealism and, lack of connectivity. Because, like, basically when you go on these experiences, you're expanding your neural pathways, right? You're getting out of your default mode network. So if you think of like a structure of something, try to put it into a little metaphor, but yeah, like a structure, like a drawing, you know, it's all these lines are connected in this. And so it's like, okay, this is my default mode network. This is how I feel when this happens. And I know that, you know, I should feel this, or, you know, we have just different ways of being, and some of them are inherited, and some of them we get from watching TV, and some we get relating from people we look up to. So they can be good, bad, ugly, you know, all kinds of different things. But this is just like our normal way of being, and we have to have this kind of normal way of being so that we feel comfortable in our normal life, because without that, you know, we can just be like anything, you know. So if you hear something, you're like, wait, does that make sense? And then you refer to your own network to say, like, does this make sense? And you, like, your past experiences, what you know, your knowledge base, all of this stuff, you know, okay, flat earth, like, wow, like, you know, like, you know, but if you just, you know, if you take so as you take psychedelics, for example, you have ways to open up to create new neural pathways, right? But like, if you're doing it for 12 hours unsupervised and all this crazy stuff is going down, and you're imprinting those into your neural pathways. And then what can happen is, if you continue to keep taking so many psychedelics, you kind of lose your grounding. You know, I met...
Right, because you start to exist too frequently and consistently out of that framework.
Yeah.
So the tool and the usefulness is to break the matrix momentarily, to be like, oh shit, there is a matrix. I didn't even know that I'm in it, and there is one. Mm-hmm. But the default mode network is there for a reason. We've been designed that way by the creator to psychologically have some sort of framework that keeps us within
reason and productivity.
That's interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
So that's what's, you know, really interesting too, because like there's the whole like microdose movement versus, you know, like the hero's dose, and, you know, and like, yeah, both are great. Again, I think all of these practices can be amazing when treated with respect, but, you know, like microdosing is more of that, you know, like the light machine. I would say the light experience, even while being quite psychedelic, is mostly more on the microdose spectrum, where it's gently, you know, opening those spaces for new choices and new neural networks. But it's not just like blasting everything open, you know. And some people are really sensitive, and, you know, like they don't need to take like 5 grams of psilocybin to have an experience. You know, you could give them the smallest amount, or take them into the light, and they can have an experience. And, you know, their system can get really out of whack if you just blast them with so much, you know, and especially if something, you know, less than appealing happens during that's outside of the environmental control, you know. It's like, we can be really traumatized. So it's just, again, I think all these things are really interesting, and I've definitely had my fair share of exploration in these different states, but I feel, you know, as we kind of mature along our spiritual path, we hold some responsibility to, you know, guide the way to others. And if we want the psychedelics to continue to be, you know, moving on this path towards legalization, we need to respect them and, you know, and take that seriously, because, you know.
I really appreciate that perspective, because as excited as I am about this movement, because I just love the expansion of consciousness, especially when it starts to happen within a dominant culture such as Western culture, that I'm just like, yeah, everyone go trip balls, let's do this, you know. But having the reverence and respect for the natural construct that we're created with, I think is really wise. And also the reason that I've, apart from the 4 ayahuasca journeys that I had last year, I'm about to go do some more, which will have already happened by the time this interview comes out. So make that 8 by the time of this release, if all goes well. But I resisted that for a long time, because my prior experiences were like going to dead shows and taking a random hit of acid from this person, and then throw some mushrooms and drink a bunch of beer. And it was really fun. I mean, it was fun as hell to watch the Grateful Dead frying on a couple of hits of acid. Like, there's a reason why Deadheads did a lot of acid. There's something about that experience that really aligned itself with psychedelics. But I never had any insights that were useful later in life. And I was absolutely doing those things as a means by which to escape my reality, because my reality was so painful, because I had no other way to deal with the trauma that I'd experienced in life and the neurotic ways in which I operated and thought and felt. And so all of my drug use, even though the intention was like to party and have fun, the party and have fun is to escape from who I am and what my current reality is.
Absolutely.
The way that I'm experiencing the world is so, I mean, this is spoken as a former addict.
Yeah. That's a danger.
Yeah. How do I say this? Like my subjective experience of reality at any given time was so painful that the only way I could change my experience of reality and my perception of it was to take something to escape from who I am and what my experience was. And so it was like everything was a painkiller. Yeah. Sometimes they were actual painkillers and opiates, and sometimes there were stimulants, and sometimes psychedelics, and sometimes depressants and barbiturates, and whatever I could take to numb my experience, because the world was just too irritating, too fast, too loud, too bright, too painful, too everything. And there's a lot of useful things to turn down the volume on life when you live in that abject pain all the time. The problem is when you cross the line of addiction, then you're moving to the point where those medicines, because I was using them rather unconsciously, but they still were my medicines, they start to turn on you. And now you tip the scales to the point where the benefits of those ways of coping get completely eclipsed by the detrimental side effects.
Exactly.
So it's like an aspirin's great if you have a headache, but you get to the point where you have to take 10 aspirin, and now you have a worse headache because you took 10 aspirin. You know, it's that kind of...
the side effects on your body, you know?
Yeah, it's the law of diminishing returns. Yeah. And so for those of us that are so fortunate to have be given the gift of willingness and humility and grace and desperation and all of those things that go into escaping from a life of addiction, I know the world of like abusing everything and having no respect for it, which is why I waited so long. I mean, 22 years before I really did anything that could possibly affect the way I feel or change perception. But having come through so many dark nights of the soul, stone cold sober, I mean, just doing a lot of work with no help from any kind of mind altering substances, that by the time I made a decision to do that, my intentions were very pure, and I was not at all trying to escape from who I am and my experience of reality, because I'm not in pain anymore. Like, I don't hate myself. I don't hate people. I don't hate the world. I'm not living in hatred and anger and fear. And there's moments where shit happens in life that suck and you get bummed out, of course. There's micro sufferings that kind of take place. Maybe not suffering, but pain, I guess. Suffering's kind of more optional, is what you do with the pain. But now, being in a place in my life where I'm like very open-minded to the exploration of these things consciously, I still want to remain very mindful that the potential to use things as an escape rather than an escape is there.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's something that each person subjectively just has to apply a certain degree of self-honesty and discernment and prudence to see why you're doing something. Like, what's your core intention?
Yeah. What is that intention? And and just taking that time to tune in with that is really important. And then, and again, deciding ahead of time the pathway of how that wants to go down or what you're working on, and really, also taking some time afterwards to really integrate that experience and apply it to life. And, that's one of the other things that the Lucia has been used for, is more like integrating kind of psychedelic experiences. So say you have this like amazing ayahuasca experience, but your nervous system can actually still be kind of shaken from that, because you're going really through a lot there. Yeah. Like on every level, it's like, whoa. So, if you have those far out experiences, and then, a lot of times too, people go out into like Peru or something, and then they come back and like, maybe the shamans don't even speak English, or like, you don't have anyone to process with, or like your family doesn't, support what you're doing, or, you don't really have any close people that don't have an agenda in your life to really talk to about it. And so that's another thing that the Lucia is actually really great for, is for integrating those experiences on the physiological level. And then, you know that the person who's holding space for a Lucia session will, understand and, listen with your other experiences as well.
And this is why you have with practitioners, not just, a solo guy like me that will one day get my hands on one of these things, but for someone that wants to do healing and do sessions, or I imagine this is probably useful for people that have healing centers and things with different modalities and devices and whatnot. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think I found a float center in Laguna Beach that has one, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Float lounge. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I'll be going down there. But I think that's probably why the training is important, right? So you're not just like cowboys and Indians, woo, Wild West, anything goes. Like, turn this light on, crank it up, like how I did it the first time, kind of. That's why.
Well, even then, I mean, I know who held space for you, Eric. He's wonderful, and even then, I think he could probably suss out energetically that you were good to go and ready to go into that experience. But for people who are more sensitive, and obviously in a conference, you're kind of just trying things. Whereas if you really book a session with someone, part of the training over the years too has really developed to like, okay, how does that person hold space? For example, I do energy healing, so I often offer that as a type of session, but it's really encouraging anyone who wants to work with this modality to bring themselves to the experience as a space holder as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And who are these dudes that came up with it? This Dr. Engelbert Winkler and Dr. Dirk Prockel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Dr. Dirk Prockel. Where are they from? How'd they get into this stuff?
Yeah, so Engelbert Winkler is a Austrian. I know, it's a really great name. Austrian psychiatrist and psychologist, and he had a near-death experience when he was quite young, actually. And so for people who are not super aware of near-death experiences, it's, when you almost die and you kind of go beyond this life. People talk about life review or like all these kind of things that they go through. And for him, it was profoundly changing. He kind of came back inspired to help out in the world. And he was just like, wow, I lost my fear of dying because, he was scared as a little kid to die. And then he got so close to it happening, but came back and was like, it's beautiful over there. I don't know what we're so worried about. So he really was so impressed by this experience. He thought, wow, if I can just show people what it's like without nearly killing them, what's another way to kind of access this space beyond life? And so he did a hypnotherapy training and was working with a solid light and kind of guiding people into these meditations with the light, and it was working pretty well. But then he started was chatting with his colleague, Dr. Dirk Prockel, who's a medical neurologist and also a psychologist, and was asking him like, what about this? What do you think? And, Dirk's wife as well is also, a therapist, psychologist. And so they were just talking about it one late night, and he's like, why don't you bring in flickering light? What about flickering light? Flickering light is, more related to brain entrainment. Maybe they could have some experience. So they started experimenting with Lucia N #1. And
okay. That's where the number 3 comes.
Yeah.
The third iteration of it. Okay.
Exactly. So Dirk brought in the flickering light, and they tried closing their eyes, and it's coming back from, ancient Greek times all the way to sitting around a flickering light at a campfire. Flashing light has been in our lives for, many times. And I also believe really in the Egyptian worlds to activate the third eye. This feels like very familiar to technology to me on a lot of more of the spiritual levels. But yeah, so they really came in surprised and amazed by what they saw when they closed their eyes and combined the solid and flickering light together. And so they really pioneered this new, or revitalized this approach to working with flickering light. And so they really use a really special method with the Lucia, which is the halogen, which is the solid light, and then the LEDs, which are flickering. And sometimes the halogen's on, sometimes it's off, but often it, mostly it opens the space. And it has a wider spectrum than LEDs, and it's thermal, meaning warm. So
it's an incandescent bulb.
Yeah.
Yeah, halogen, yeah.
Yeah, so it's better for, your body and system, as you know from your previous talks and everything, how important light is, and what types of light we're receiving. Receiving that, solid light and that warmth is very, feminine and opening, and, we become more receptive. And then as the flickering light comes through, that's kind of the more intense driving. So you can kind of look at that as the feminine, and then the masculine of the flickering is kind of what's like moving things. And the flickering light goes through different frequencies. And instead of being a direct brain entrainment, like there's some things with like binaural beats and like little glasses that kind of have the same thing, and they're just kind of focusing on getting you into one state of consciousness. But as Dirk has explained to me before, the neurologist, like it's almost like pop science to think about like a brainwave state as being just theta or alpha or things like that. Because if you look at an EEG, all of these, you know, brain waves, which are kind of just like rhythms, you can think of them as rhythms, are happening all the time. And when you're getting into theta, for example, that means just like the theta rhythm is really elevated. It's like really happening. But the other brain waves are happening as well. And so we can kind of control our brain, which is, again, kind of the more masculine approach to taking it to a certain level, which can be really helpful in terms of like really getting into a specific state, or if you have a brain dysfunction, for example, people with ADHD who really have trouble staying in the alpha or high alpha ranges, you know, you can do kinds of neurofeedback, which...
Yeah, I love neurofeedback.
Yeah, which encourage you into those states. But however, if you don't have, you know, some kind of issue with your brain, then you should be a little careful about what you're encouraging your brain into, or like really in training to for long periods of time. And, you know, their perspective is more looking at it in terms of relating it to a psychedelic expansive state of consciousness where you're actually trying to get to a more harmonic state. And so, you know, people call it coherence as well across the brain. But the harmonics, I've seen it on the EEG, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's like when you're playing a singing bowl and, you know, all the sounds are like in sync, and you're like, oh God, it's just so beautiful. Like, how's that? It's like if you look on the, you know, EEG, each of your brain waves is like in alignment with each other, like the relationship between them.
That was going to be my next question, is have these guys and you guys done QEEGs on people under the light, and what happened? So that's happened, huh?
Yeah. So that's kind of the deeper experiences. And again, it's interesting with the Lucia because every person is really different. And since it's not a direct brain entrainment with like a goal of getting into one particular state, it's more of like, we think of it more of like a song or a type of music. So it's like, okay, put the song on and here's the invitation to dance, right? And the light reaches out. Now you can take the hand of the light and go into the most beautiful dance of your life, or you can kind of resist and do this like pulling back and forth thing, or you can kind of just like, let's just lay down together, or you can, you know, do all kinds of different things with it. Or I'm actually going to do my own dance over here and just ignore you, you know, like, so there's all different ways you can interact with the experience, and it's not forced. And the more kind of you work with it, the more like the deeper you can often go, unless sometimes it takes you by surprise, like what happened with me when it really just like, okay, like I didn't even realize there was a hand extended. I'm just suddenly doing the best dance of my life. So there's different ways that, you know, you can work with it. And that's why every time is so different, because you're in a different place and, you know, the dance is going to be different. But it's really ultimately about, you know, a better way that they found to measure it is actually by looking at the kind of like, you could think of like power at different aspects of the brain. So how many different parts of the brain are lit up at the same time, or like kind of looking at an fMRI of what's happening in your brain. And so instead of just looking at these rhythms of the brain, because they've also found with psychedelic experience, it's like, okay, what brainwave state are in, and like, you know, it's not really like straightforward. It's like, oh, well, when you're having psychedelic visuals, your alpha is usually low. But beyond that, they haven't really found any definitive data in terms of psychedelic experience. But obviously, you're having a totally different altered state, right? So there's something else going on here, and there's different ways to measure it. And so they've found that actually, if you look at the kind of power, is a good way to think about it in terms of different aspects of your brain, like what's being lit up at different times concurrently. You know, some people may have seen like people on LSD and their whole brain's like lit up, you know. And so that's, again, why it's so important, like, what's around you, because you're imprinting that into your brain, right? So when you're in these states of consciousness. But yeah, it helps activate different parts of your brain, which opens the way for new neural pathways to be made. And they did actually a study at the University of Sussex, which is coincidentally where I went to do my master's degree, although it was in something totally different. So cool, synchronicities. But yeah, they did a study there. Dr. David Schwartzman did a study comparing data set from a psilocybin experience to the Lucia light, and in so many different ways they correlated. It was fascinating. It was like very similar data about, all these different measurements of, the spiritual side of the light was more relaxing. but kind of the visual experience and how they felt afterwards and all kinds of different things. It's a really cool study. I can send you the link. But
oh, please do. That's fascinating.
Yeah, but
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Also, the term that you used, which is something I'm really getting into with Joe Dispenza's work, is coherence, brain coherence. And again, getting out of the non-linear way of looking at brain entrainment, like, oh, I want more alpha, or now I'm theta. Like when I've done a lot of neurofeedback, when you look at your QEEG, there's all of these overlapping different combination of brainwaves that are infinite, and so it's like in nature, it is a nonlinear experience, and it's about that, the coherence not only between your brain and mind being kind of another element of brain, or your brain, the way I look at it, sort of like a transducer or receiver for mind, right? Because mind is non-local and universal in terms of the quantum element of hive mind and group mind and God mind. It's coming through the brain, and then that becomes thought, but then there's the heart center too, and that's the real key, is like I zero in on this stuff, and then I think I've zeroed in on it, and then I go, oh, but there's more, which is the beauty of there's beauty of discovery, right? Of doing the things that I do. But this idea of coherence, like that's really the measurement. Like that's where we feel a true flow state, right? Is when your heart rate variability and just whatever random combination of brain waves tunes you into your higher self, so that you have more access to that. And that's what's motivating your words, deeds, behavior, character, the way that you interact with the world.
Absolutely.
So there's much more to it than just, altering your brain waves, which is useful to tune up the radio, right?
Absolutely.
To get the radio tuned to the right channel, but then where's the programming coming from, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that brings me to my next line of questioning, which you kind of just answered, is that in addition to neurofeedback, which is possible for people to do at home if you get a whole system and you have to learn how to do it. I do it at a place called Peak Brain Institute, which is in West LA. It's helped me immensely. I've done a podcast on it, guys. Again, I don't remember the number. There's 250 shows now or something, but if you look up, we'll put it in the show notes. Show notes, people, you magicians and wizards, look up the neurofeedback episode with Dr. Andrew Hill and put it in the show notes. It'll be in there. But what you're doing there is you're training your brain to up level or down level certain patterns in the brain waves that you use. And it's very effective, as you mentioned, for ADD, ADHD, PTSD, all these kind of things. I just wanted to be more focused, and it's helped me to achieve that. But some of the other things that I'm really into would be, there's this device called NuCalm, which is a brain entrainment neuroacoustic kind of situation where you listen to these very specific, deeply embedded tracks that take you on these journeys, and then you have a little disc you put on your wrist that has this sounds really woo-woo, but it's used primarily by the military, which tells you, no, this shit is legit. NuCalm is so legit. It's for, the main purpose of NuCalm is to lower stress and to help you recover from stress. And that's why it's so useful for the military and in pro sports. And you put this little disc, and it has the quantum imprint of, I think, like GABA and theanine. And then between that and the neuroacoustic sounds that you're listening to open up your GABA receptors, and the net effect of that is brain entrainment, but to the point of recovery and getting what feels like, in terms of the recovery of your nervous system, 2 or 3 hours of sleep in either like a 20 or 50-minute session. So my first idea was like, oh, sick, I'm going to put on that and then get under the Lucia light, because I always just stack everything, and experiment like that.
Very
and,
American.
Yeah, it's like, well, if one thing's good for you and feels good, let's hook up to 5 fucking things, Yes, very American, and just very obsessive.
It's fun. I mean, why?
Yeah, I mean,
exploring
why not?
all these things.
Why not? Yeah. But from what you're saying, to force our brainwaves into like a certain pattern or something in combination with Lucia would kind of nullify the effect of just allowing your consciousness, your brain, your mind, all of that to just go where it wants to go based on its unique response to the light.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's really interesting because I in my years, I've kind of gone along the same journeys. I was like, oh my gosh, there's, the Monroe Institute.
Yeah. Oh
like,
my God.
These amazing.
I used to have an iPod full of the Monroe Institute hemispheric synchronization, where they take especially for guys, it's useful because we have a smaller corpus callosum, I think it's called. I always get a colostrum mixed up, but we don't as easily jump from left and right hemisphere, and so it would create this synchronization. Yeah, it's dope.
So I tried that actually. I was trying out with this really far out person who was really into all this stuff as well, and we tried the most intense astral body, out of astral experience, out of body thing, with the most intense Lucia light session, which is one of the most intense ones, called DMT. And I was like, okay, let's do this, and wow, it was not a comfortable experience.
Really?
Yeah.
So
it
you
was
combined it with the Monroe Institute tracks?
Yeah. And actually the experience was like, okay, let's go. And then as soon as the light started kind of flashing and doing its thing and the beats were going, I kind of lost control of my head. It started going back and forth, and then my shoulder, and I just and it felt terrible. I felt like two things were just ripping my brain into, different directions. The fun that we get to do with experimenting on ourselves. I just pulled off the headphones, stop the light, and I felt really weird for 10 minutes. I had to really ground myself, and I was like, okay. And then we reached out to the Monroe Institute, and we're like, hey, we figured out this thing, because this guy who I was actually experimenting with, he was convinced, he was ex-military and all this stuff, and he was really into the Monroe Institute, and he was like, I figure out we found this new way to get out of body, it's gonna work every time, and he was like, maybe we should have just stuck with it a little longer. And they're like, no, please stop, this is not healthy experimentation. You're pulling your brain into two different directions at the same time, and that is not healthy for your brain. And so I kind of freaked out and made a whole thing on my website, do not combine with binaural beats, and and then over the years I've kind of softened into it. And some people do, you can do a theta hum in the background or something like that, and most people fall asleep. It's very relaxing. So there's ways that you can kind of gently encourage your brain, but in general I say why, it's not necessary. And actually the Lucia is doing something totally different. So there's a few different things that you can combine with it, but in general, anything else that's working with your brain is not encouraged.
Right. Okay. And that would be also inclusive. The thing I just, when I find the thing, then I'm like, oh, next week there's another thing. But I just found this other thing called Brain Tap, which is also a neuroacoustic, audio experience that has these goggles on the headphones that produce, not dissimilar to the Lucia light. It's a flashing light. If you open your eyes, what's this going to do? But when you close your eyes and you have a combination of these, sometimes guided visualizations, and sometimes it is just a theta hum that puts you in that state, and it's super cool. But I'm already seeing that would be
counterproductive.
Yeah, it's just not necessary. It's overkill. Yeah. So we'll forget about other technologies and just focus on the light itself. And this morning, because it happened to be one of my 5 days on, 2 day off protocol for microdosing psilocybin, today happened to be an on day. And so took my little tincture this morning, which is very much not a psychoactive dose. But I thought, oh, that's actually a perfect day to do it. It wouldn't hurt to have a little something in there in the old dome, So I did that, and I don't know that it necessarily added anything to the experience based on the 2 times before that I'd used the Lucia light. Probably didn't hurt at all, but what about the combination of different, psychedelics, whether they be synthetic or, plant medicines and things like that, and the Lucia light? And I know you probably have to tread lightly here because, you're involved in a, organization that has to be accountable. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So, I have a few things to say about it. First of all, more of our kind of official position is that we really recommend not taking anything else, because kind of one of the main things about the Lucia is remembering that you don't need anything besides you to access these experiences. The light's just shining on what's already there. After one Lucia light experience, you can close your eyes and sit in the sun. You can go like this with your hands in front of your eyes. It's just open hands crossing each other. And you actually get a little bit of that experience. And if you already had a deep experience there, you kind of know how to go back there. And that's kind of what we're working with people to teach them, that like this is already within you. And we're just showing you a way to access what's there, and you don't need to take anything outside of yourself. So, we don't offer those sessions in combination. That being said, I've, been to festivals, right? And I was actually really like terrified at first to like take the light to festivals, because I'm like, oh my God, people are going to be on all kinds of drugs. Like, is this safe? Is this responsible? Like, is this, what's going to happen? And, as I mentioned, I'm kind of a nerd. So I was doing some research on different studies, and I came upon the strangest study, and it was about, a baboon that had light sensitive epilepsy. And so, if it was around a flashing light, it would have a seizure. And now gets the interesting part. I don't know who funded the study or, who thought to do this. But basically they gave this, I believe it was a baboon, LSD. And then they put it under a flashing light, and it did not have a seizure. And I was like, whoa, like that's interesting. So, I mean, again, I was like, well, that's not like our mission, and I was curious, but it kind of relieved some of the anxiety I had in terms of like what would happen. Legally, we on our informed consent forms really have people make sure that they're not on anything, because we can't be responsible for what would happen. Everyone's different, and we definitely don't want to encourage people to take psychedelics and come. I mean, even if in the case that during the experience it was fine, if you have to get in your car and drive afterwards and you're already really relaxed and now you're on a psychedelic, like it's just like, wow, that's, really not safe. So I wouldn't recommend that, but I haven't had any, adverse experiences from people doing it. And I think it would be interesting to see how things could move forward if and when such things are legalized.
Cool. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I've found useful lately, as I was telling you a little bit before we recorded, is microdosing of ketamine, mm-hmm. which anytime I mention that to someone, they're like, what you're using, man? Like, you go into a rave? I'm like, no, that's that's a completely different thing. And research it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of clinical data as to the efficacy of ketamine in small micro doses, especially if mm-hmm. it's administered over a long period of time, to treat sometimes depression and cure people of depression in 1 3-hour session. I mean, this was mm-hmm. the psychiatrist. So in that kind of setting, in a microdose capacity.
I think those are actually large doses, though.
Well, yeah, but with a doctor, that's a different thing. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying there's evidence to suggest that it has therapeutic uses other than going to a rave and going in a K-hole and like walking into the fucking wall over and over again or whatever, right? If that's your thing, hey, knock yourself out. No pun intended. But I'm talking about for introspective work, mm-hmm. self-discovery, self-therapy. So I've done it, I don't know, a few times during meditation, and I haven't really cracked the code. Like I sense there's something there, and it's a very subtle kind of experience. It's not like you're wasted or something. Mm-hmm. Like I'm thinking of ketamine as on those shows, like the, like those addict shows. What was the one? Intervention. Uh-huh. Like you see a kid on ketamine, you're like, oh shit, I'm never doing that. I mean, they're like literally just walking into the wall and just completely, it does not
falling over in the middle
does not look fun. So I was a little apprehensive, but take a tiny amount. And I took it a couple times and I was like, okay, this could be useful for something. I'm not really sure what, but then I did it very recently with the New Calm experience that I described. And also then, that was an hour, and then that was over, and I was like, I could use some more of this, because I was working out a lot of stuff out of the subconscious and visioning and all kinds of stuff, manifestation type stuff. And then I did the brain tap right after while I was still in it. I ended up spending about 2.5 hours with that experience. And again, like it's a light enough where you could pop out of it if you wanted to, but you don't really want to, because mm-hmm. you're making progress kind of sorting things out. And I was thinking, wow, that could be a really unique experience, that particular compound mm-hmm. with the Lucia light. So, of course, you're not authorizing that people do that. I'm just speaking out loud. That could be mm-hmm. a curiosity, because it's mildly psychedelic. There are some visuals, and that's why it's great for visualizing your future and using it for something mm-hmm. positive. But it's also a bit a bit of a sedative, and it is a bit disassociative. So it's really easy to kind of forget about your body, which happens to me in meditation anyway. You're like, whoa, I have an arm, or the dog moves or something. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing that I'm looking forward to kind of consciously experimenting with a bit more.
It is an interesting thing. And I would just say, like a word of caution for people who do have addiction history. It seems like you've, gotten really far on your path with that. And so you're in a different space. But I think that...
Well, we'll see. I don't know if my podcast stops coming out one week. Someone check on me.
Yeah, right. Oh, my gosh. I'll be worried. We're like, we know what happened.
If you see me scrounging around on 6th and Alvarado in downtown LA looking unkempt, please, somebody put me in rehab.
But it is interesting, actually, because actually at the Science and Non-duality conference, a researcher came up to me and said, wow, some people have actually compared the Lucia light to ketamine. It's always interesting to me what drug the light is compared to. And I'm like, it's just the light. Let's not compare it. But it's a totally different thing. And she was comparing it to ketamine and saying that, wow, she really wishes that the Lucia could be used in research instead of ketamine because of the potential for abuse with ketamine. And, I think that it is interesting to look at how, yes, there's some potential there, but for anyone who has a past history of addiction and isn't to the place that you're at, to be really real with yourself before trying something like that, because it is really dissociative, and any kind of dissociative is the number one thing you're going to do if you're trying to escape pain and misery in your life, right? And, it's I actually, among many other people I'm sure know of, I had some good friends in the UK who really abused ketamine, and it didn't start like that. It started with you can have an ego death, and that's why it can be used for treatment resistant, depression. But again, if you don't do the work with integrating that and changing your life ecology, as I like calling it, then, it creeps back. And so I've seen actually, even with people just kind of using it for depression, and again, this is more in the larger doses, although I've seen a lot of people kind of partying on the smaller doses as well. But I have seen that it does work to actually get you out of that depression. It can work. But even when done kind of clinically, there is much more potential to kind of link that in some way that you can kind of oh, it's not, I'm just having this ego death experience, and it can just slip in, and then suddenly you're oh, I'm doing that, and now your bladder has holes in it and you're falling all over the place. There's a lot of really gnarly things there. So I would just say and again, that kind of comes back to it's almost like this great mother protectiveness around people working with these medicines. I'm just okay, whoa, let's just slow down for a second, these are powerful things. And, again, it depends where you're at, and just be really radically honest with yourself. If you're on your path, where am I at? Is this safe to me to open this door at all? Or at least making sure, am I telling anyone about it? Do I feel comfortable? Asking yourself those things, is this something I'm hiding from people? Just notice how you're approaching these things if you feel open to exploring with any of these things, because it's you'll know right there if you're being honest with yourself what it is. And I think that in terms of the spectrum of psychedelics, that ketamine is definitely the number one that, on the kind of, what could be abused in the psychedelic realm. That's number one. MDMA and ketamine are the most potential for abuse. So I just be aware of that. And, again, I'm all about psychedelic exploration and consciousness expansion. And I just think whenever we're sharing with anyone about these experiences, if, depending where we are on our path and how we're experiencing it, that I please ask people to be respectful and conscious, because we don't know what people have gone through or where they're at and how they're going to receive and implement this information.
Well, thank you for being the responsible one. That's the statement that I should have just given, because I know a lot of people in recovery listen to the show, and they're probably this dude's off the fucking rails, or they're oh, well, he's doing it, I should do that too. And so I know, as someone who really suffered under the bondage of addiction for a long, long time, from the time I was a little kid until I was 26, I know what a horrific way of life that is, and how it really is torture, at a certain point. Fun for a while, then, fun with problems, then problems with problems. That's how that shit goes. If you're wired like some of us are. I know some people, they party like rock stars and have a great career and a family, and, they can totally control it. I'm not that guy. So I think what you said in there that's really key is the radical self-honesty, because denial is so insidious, and it's so easy for your addict or alcoholic mind to be like, oh no, I'm doing this to become spiritual, and it really is a very, very slippery slope. I'll just try
a little more today, it's like so
I appreciate you saying that. It's good for me to hear, to be reminded of also, because I still have that little devil on my shoulder that's like, no, you're good, do it again. But if I personally, like, for me, the barometer is like the secrecy, right? Like, am I not telling anyone? For me, it's like, I know I would be having a problem with something if I'm out somewhere and I'm like, I gotta get home and get to the thing. Or if I'm running out and I'm like, oh fuck, I'm running out of the thing. I remember that because that was my whole life. My whole life was about like some little baggie of some little thing that's in my room, and I know exactly where it is and how much there is left, and can I get more, and like obsessiveness. Yeah, just all of that. And I personally never experienced that at all, except maybe with coffee. It's probably I'm most addicted to my just one morning coffee. I don't drink it all day, but
I have that one too.
If I'm like run out of coffee, I get crackhead vibes. I'm like, okay, I got to place an order. Get 5 pounds this time. But it's funny with ketamine though, like it's not entirely pleasant. That's even in a small dose. That's where, for me at least personally, where it is, as I said, mildly psychoactive, but however much it is like, I would never feel like, oh, sick, like that's kind of fun. Let me do 5 times as much, or let me do it every day, or wake up in the morning or do it, like, oh, gross.
Totally.
But I do know that a lot of people do have that problem. And that's why even when I was contemplating doing ayahuasca, I was like, I would ask people that were very experienced with plant medicines, and I'm like, yeah, but dude, like, what if I want to, start using it as an escape or like a party drug? And everyone that's done a lot of ayahuasca is like, no, dude. They're like, this is not the thing you're going to like want to take some home and keep it in the fridge and like just party on and like, listen to music and just hang out. They're like, it kicks your ass. And once I went and did it, I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Like, I'm not going to walk out of here and be like, yo, where can I get some ayahuasca?
Exactly. And I think that's, and I think that's the thing that's so great about psychedelics and why they are finding this more of this opening, in terms of that. Because the legit ones, like some of them are really, really powerful. God. And that's why you should be, in a safe container where you're feeling held and you're not going to get more traumatized. And also knowing that, but even that, like I said, I know people who go every month. That's an addiction to me. It doesn't matter if it's like every day, but like, again, it's like about implementing it. So anyway, I just think it's a fascinating time because it's like, with that radical self-honesty, why am I doing any of these things? And you don't have to be an addict to ask yourself that, just look at your path, and there's so many distractions, and, really at the end of the day, we don't need much, we really don't need much, like you can go live a very simple life. And, I love the tech. I love getting, trying new experiences and all of this stuff. But like in terms of coming down to the base level of like how to live a healthy life, it's pretty simple, get some good sleep and, like eat healthy and love yourself, right? And do the things you do with love and have gratitude in your life every day, like these are the basics. And, I think that sometimes we can forget that too, because there's so much to add on. And, I can definitely feel that. And, I think there's 2 extremes. There's extremes on either side of that where, people are denying technology or like, all of that. And, it's like, well, we are going to be bathed in 5G here pretty soon if this is what's going forward. So we do need to kind of really consider like how we can use this tech in all these different ways. But also the other side of that is remembering like, what one of the coolest techs I've ever discovered is my breath. Totally. Like the awareness of my own breathing can change my life. So like I just think that it's fun and interesting, and I think that sometimes like listening to these shows can almost develop a different kind of addictive like inspiration to be like, I need to buy that, and I need to try this, and and it's also like, ooh, watch that too, because that's an interesting one. And if you're on the spiritual path of coming more into the present, You know, it's like, how are you using the things you have? Like, are you, you know, like what's really working for you, or like streamlining what really works? And, or like, instead of, you know, like, it's great. I think for some people, even with the Lucia, like buying a Lucia can be an amazing thing to implement it in your life as a practice to help change your nervous system, to rewire, to get into these deeper states of meditation. But, you know, for other people, maybe you're actually going to get more benefit from going to see somebody who has one once a week and have that human connection with them and have them hold space for you and like drop into this experience in a beautiful way. It's not always just like, oh, I need to buy it for myself. It's like, you know, great. Yeah. If you really feel the call, and you know in your heart when you really feel the call, you're like, oh my God, this is like calling me, you know. But if it's not that, you know, then there's other ways to experience these things. And, you know, and sometimes it's the human connection that we need more than anything else, the community or the connection with nature. And we can just like throw it off as, you know, being something else. But if you find yourself continuously unsatisfied with the things that you are doing, then, you know, it's good to reflect on that a little bit too.
That's hilarious that you brought that up. And that's also true, because this morning I woke up and, I don't know, it's just like everything, just emails going off. There's all these meetings and all this stuff. Just life was super activated and I was not. Kind of slept until 9 and was do my morning routine is like a couple hours just to become me, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, am I feeling a little off? I was kind of self-obsessed with like, how do I feel? Am I okay? Do I feel focused? Am I happy? I don't know. I'm not that happy. Just like really in myself and in not a positive sense. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I'll go up and do the red light thing. Then I'll get in an ice bath. And, you know, I do all the shit. And it's like always things from outside of myself that I'm implementing to change the way that I feel inside. And I have some self-awareness of that and play with that. But I did have the awareness today. I was like, Luke, you know, when you feel like this, most of the time you just need to call a really close friend and just like tell them your fucking problems, you know, and just like relate to someone in a really honest, vulnerable way. And then you hang up the phone after 20 or 30 minutes and it impacted more than all that shit that you have in your house and every goddamn supplement and everything at lukestorey.com/store. And it's a great reminder for me. And I also want to tell people that because I know that people listen to the show and they're like, I need a Lucia light. I need the Juve light. I need the sauna. I need the biocharger, the amp coil, all these things. They're like thousands of dollars. Yeah. And it's great when people, you know, can roll like that. But I think the thing that you're saying, just the one thing to take away from me is human connection. I mean, sometimes like days go by and I haven't even gotten a hug from a person. I live up in the hills and I'm just like, I don't know. It's just the way my life is right now. Yeah. Single and whatnot. And so I'm like, shit, I'm not really connecting with people. I'm kind of like in hermit mode. And then that sort of self-perpetuates that sense of existential loneliness or isolation that my subconscious and or nervous system is like, okay, what can we put in us or around us to change the way we feel? Because we don't feel fulfilled and nurtured. Yeah. When really the fulfillment of nurture and nurturing is primarily from being around other people that you care about and they care about you.
Physical touch, closeness.
Yeah, all that.
You know,
so I need hugs after this, you guys.
Okay, we can give you some hugs, all right?
But thank you for doing that, because people, you know, like I just love all this stuff. It's my job, it's my hobby, and so doing all the things is just how I'm fucking wired. I just have had to love and accept myself for being that guy who's just like, I don't know, it's just my thing. But I always like to tell people, in addition to the connection, is like get in the sun, you know, get in some cold water, get in some hot springs, get in a sauna. Like the sauna costs money, but breath work, conscious breathing, prayer, hugs, reading a beautiful spiritual passage from a powerful book. I mean, there's the things that really move you and transform you are mostly free, and they're mostly from nature.
Exactly. And then for the other things, it's like, be patient with it. If it calls to you, it calls to you, you know? Yeah. Some things really call to you and you like can't get it out of your head. And
well, that's what happened with this damn thing, man. I was like, I try all kinds of shit at the conferences. You know what I mean? Like I don't even remember most of them. It's like, oh yeah, bells and whistles, cool, whatever. That was fun. I think I feel something. Do I? I don't know. But this particular thing, I mean, to the point I came home and was like, okay, I'm going to find this shit. And I couldn't find it around here because I would just go to a practitioner. So this light really stuck with me. There's just a couple of things I wanted to ask you. Sure. While we're still here and we'll wrap it up in a minute. One was in terms of the studies that have been done, seeing what parts of the brain light up, is there any indication that this is affecting your pineal gland? A. B, as you said, everything we need is already within us. Is there any indication that, because we have our DMT within us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's related, I think, to the pineal gland. Is there anything that's going on a neurotransmitter, hormonal, brain level that would indicate that the pineal gland and the DMT situation that is within us is being activated?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a tricky one because of where science is. David Strassman was really all about, the spirit molecule and, DMT and kind of activating the third eye and really saying that it comes from the third eye. But it was kind of more of a, postulation, because one of the interesting things is when DMT is endogenously released into your bloodstream, which means naturally released, we have about 10 seconds to measure it before it disappears. So, or maybe trippy. It's like 10 minutes. So it's like a really, really short period of time that it's going to be in your bloodstream. So it's been really challenging, especially with prohibitions, even though it's related, it's something that's already being produced within your body, to get, any kind of funding for any study that can prove, DMT is being released in your blood. So a lot of people kind of make this claim like, yes, it's activating your pineal gland or decalcifying your pineal gland. And we haven't been able to prove that. As any kind of energy aware person would notice, it's definitely activating. I would say the word activating, because that's something that we can acknowledge. It's some people really even feel a pulsation there. People who've worked with it for a long time anecdotally share that they, feel more aware of their intuition. They have more kind of visionary capabilities. I mean, even in the visionary experience of seeing all these colors and patterns and everything during the experience and beyond is very, third eye-esque. But in terms of actual studies, we've been a little more limited in our possibilities there. And, the doctors who created the Lucia are also more on the side of looking at the open possibility of everything that it could be, we had someone give a talk a couple years ago at the conference about people with really severe cancer and how he did this protocol with them. And then he would, get them all amped about their life. You can do anything. You can change anything. Or you want to do it. You really want to do it. Really getting them there and then having them do a light experience and poof, cancer's gone, this is anecdotal. This is a very specific thing. Does it mean if you have cancer and you do the Lucia light once, it's gone? No, but it's reminding that if we leave open this incredible space and don't try to define it too much with specific studies about what exactly is happening, when, a lot of what's happening in the brain, we're just little apes still poking at it brain, we really don't know the infinite complexity of connection and magic that's happening in there all the time. Even to just have this conversation would blow our minds. We're still apes in that sense. We really can't perceive and to that extent. And so the even big leaps in brain science, you didn't even think neuroplasticity existed until up to about 10 years ago. Well, you're screwed. Good luck with that. It's no, you can totally remake anything. So, we're really slowly coming into being able to prove these things scientifically. And I think that's one aspect of the Lucia experience. And, from the creators themselves, they really say if you get too in your head about it, you should probably just not even try it, because it's more about, actually the experience itself and seeing where you're at and your reflection in the experience and seeing what's possible for you in that moment. And when you're really embracing the possibility of everything, is it decalcifying your pineal gland? Yeah. Is it, activating, creating positive neural networks? Yeah. Is it doing all these, is it releasing DMT in your blood? Yeah, it's totally possible. All these things are really possible. Is it happening on a measurable scientific study that we have published? Not yet. And we'll see if we do. But there haven't really been any, they're not quite as interested in the pineal gland or, a lot of this kind of esoteric realms. Right. But yeah, I would say from my experience personally, from what I've seen with working with this for years now, that absolutely, huge experiences happen. Even my first experience that I explained, I really believe I had a DMT release. It felt like DMT. I've had a few experiences, like I mentioned, with ayahuasca and DMT, and it was that, like, it wasn't like something else. And yes, it just came from light. So it was something endogenously produced within myself. So there's a different like feeling to it. But yeah, it was that deep of an experience. So again, I think the cool and sometimes frustrating part about the Lucia light is that so much is possible, and yet, like, our own expectations and are our biggest limitation into what that can be. So whether we expect like or need to prove it, or whether we just go in like knowing this is what we want to get from it, like those are the things that actually hold us back from having the fullest life and the fullest experience in the Lucia light.
That makes perfect sense. And I also suspect that there is something there happening. And at the end of the day, who cares? Like, do you need to know? It makes you feel better, Yeah. But I think what made me think of that was because the visual experience is so psychedelic and so reminiscent of the DMT kind of visuals that happen. But also, I'm just totally obsessed with Joe Dispenza's work right now, and all the stuff that he talks about in terms of just the physiology of the brain and all of this stuff, and the practices that he recommends in his meditations and things like that. He doesn't call them this, but when I hear his stuff, I'm like, dude, this is Kundalini yoga.
Yeah.
I mean, he's literally describing so many of the practices that Yogi Bhajan, who's up on the wall there, brought to America and carried through these traditions from India. And these are the kind of psychedelic experiences you can have working with your breath and the energy centers and holding the energy and moving the energy around.
Totally.
And it's all energy within you. And it does at times have a very cathartic emotional experience associated with it, and also can totally rearrange your psyche in the best possible sense and produce these spontaneous healings.
Absolutely.
And it's in the realm of the mystical. And so you have scientists that are like, we want to understand how it works so we can quantify it. And I love that too. That's why I ask questions like that, because I have that part.
I have that part too.
And also the part that's just like, nah, who cares? It feels good. Like Kundalini yoga, when I started doing it, I was like, you guys are fucking nuts. You got to be kidding me. Like, what you're doing what with your hands? Why? What's the purpose?
Yeah.
And then Yogi Bhajan would, because oftentimes he's quoted in the sets, as we call them. The teacher just kind of reads what Yogi Bhajan said, and he's like, this decalcifies the pineal gland and moves your magnetic field into the stratosphere. And you're like, really, dude? Like, I'm open-minded, but this sounds like bullshit. And then fast forward 8-9 years, hearing Joe Dispenza go, no, scientifically, your magnetic field is expanding into your aura. This is, this is what we can clinically verify. And it's like, oh my God, these ancient practices are
really working.
This work that we can do with our breath and energy really produce some incredible experiences. And if you, as you said, if you can learn how to integrate them and have some help, can really transform you. I had this happen too with the early iterations of the Wim Hof training I was doing a few years ago. He had one particular breath exercise, which was very similar, like a longer period, kind of like holotropic breathing. I think maybe is where he borrowed it from. And he literally called it the DMT breath. And there's like a long kind of pretty vigorous in and out. And at the end, I think you hold
your breath.
Yeah, you hold the exhale until you're getting the T-Rex hands and everything. And then there's an inhale that you hold, and then your brain just goes, and you are tripping balls, and people are laughing, crying. And he's like, yeah, that's the DMT part.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you can even do that under the light. Ooh.
Oh, no way. Breath work under the light? Oh, my God.
So we call it kind of like advanced practice,
I'm in. Come over tomorrow. We're going to do advanced practice. I'm going to take a bunch of psychedelics, do a bunch of breath work. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so last thing we got to talk about, because this is the drum roll. Everyone's like, okay, dude, we get it. This is awesome. How much does it cost? Where do we get it? Now, this is where we get into for some people, womp womp. Yeah. There aren't that many, I think most of our listeners are in the States. There aren't that many of them around. Some are private owners that just hook up their friends. There are practitioners. And there's two models, one of them being $23,000, one of them being $7,500. Do I have that right? The single use, and then the practitioner one, you can fit a few heads under at once.
Yeah, you can get about 6 people maximum.
Okay. And so, how many people have these? If someone wanted to find someone, oh yeah, I live in, Miami, I want to find one around here. How do people figure out where they are that they can go do sessions if they can't be so fortunate as to afford one themselves?
Yeah, well, so there's a few different things there. First of all, I would like to start by saying that, the reason that they're so expensive, because a lot of people actually respond quite angrily to me when I send them the brochure after they request it. So I'm going through this for a while, but, and I kind of had a little bit of that experience myself, like, why is this so expensive? Like, come on, but a lot of research and development went into creating this and being able to get it really like such specific frequencies. Okay. And also, and just, I don't know, the quality of it. Like, you could try it and you're like, wow, this is amazing. And that quality extends from the original creator's like intention of the experience, right? Like we were speaking of earlier, like there's all this like conscious tech, and it's like, oh, it's like made in a factory in China, like, and you don't know where it is or what those conditions are. That's being imprinted into the product. 1. 2, you're being pretty irresponsible by supporting that. If you're like doing it for consciousness, it's just something to think about. Like, how conscious is this? And like, does
having your consciousness device manufactured in a slave labor camp?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's a lot of things. Like, it's just like
my iPhone right here. I'm like, every time I pick up my iPhone, I'm like, there's like bad juju behind that.
Yeah, and look at the iPhone. It's like how, what that costs, and it's like built to, it's designed to break down in a few years. So that's also like a really intense karmic thing going on there. But yeah, so basically, a lot of the cost comes from the fact that it's a medical grade device. It's not a medical device. It doesn't treat, cure, heal, anything like that, but it's designed to be the same capacity. So it's all made of local materials in Austria. They get the sheet metal, everything there, like local. There's just a few different, there's an amazing engineer, Yuri, who has this heart of gold and super genius who, brought this to life from a concept, in an initial attempt with an espresso maker to be what it is now. But, it's a lot of work that kind of goes into it. And then even just like making each part, it's really made to last. He would say like, oh, you can bury it underground for 100 years and it still works when it comes up. It's like family heirloom level. So if you think about it, it's something that, and the creators are really about that too. They're like, yeah, it's expensive because like, we want you to use it. Like, we want you to feel a real call. And that's why I'd say too, you can go to find a session, and which if you're looking for that, you can look at my website, which is lucialightexperience.com. And then if you look under book a session, we have different portals, and I will be updating it within the next week. So feel free to shoot me an email if you don't see any place near you, because we do have some new practitioners, and I've just been so busy buzzing around these conferences and my own life that I've been a little behind in updating, but we have even more than are on there. So it's made really high quality and to last. And so, and the goal was initially that, again, it wasn't really made for personal use. It was made for practitioners to work with people because they really trust that human connection as well. Now with the home portal, which I was really excited about, I've been excited and kind of like, let's do this for like years. Like, we need something for our own. There's a way to have it on a cheaper cost. And it's really good for giving yourself sessions because it's just right above you. But even then, we do recommend that you do like several sessions with someone, or like if you just buy it, like have a friend sit with you and hold space for each other. Sit there, if it gets too bright, you have someone to turn it down for you. You have someone to share your experience with, because again, it's like these technologies can be isolating. If you get all these tech in your house and you have no friends and you're just doing all this thing, like your heart's still lacking, you need to nourish that. So it's like, it's something to share. That's always been one of the things as well. But yeah, we do sell them. I'm a U.S. distributor and international distributor, so you can reach out to me. My contact info is on here, Allison Lucia Light at Gmail, or the traveling light machine at Gmail. But we'll have the contact on the session notes, and you can definitely reach out and get one. I'm the trainer, so I do trainings as well. If you're interested in being a practitioner, where there is a demand every day. I get emails from people like, where can I do this? And there's only about 30 places in the whole U.S. where you can publicly go. There's several hundred. There's about 300 or 400 lights in existence right now, which is still pretty low for how long it's been around. But it's growing in its popularity. And even just recently, I feel like there's been a sudden awareness of it. It's like almost like, certain technologies like kind of are birthed before their time. And then they kind of reach a moment where people are like, wait, what is that? And I think it's like, on par with this psychedelic awareness and expansion. It's like, hey, awesome. Here's a tool where you can have a psychedelic-like experience that's just with light. So you don't have to get into any of the risks or long sessions or side effects or, all of that you're dealing with, but, have this great experience. So, if you're interested, reach out and, I
think that's one of the other interesting things about it is even though at times it can be a little intense and, you're seeing this kaleidoscope of colors and it's just like, whoa, shit, what's going on? Mm-hmm. But to make it stop, you just open your eyes and it's completely gone and everything's normal.
Yeah, or you can just cover your eyes.
Yeah, try doing that on 3 hits of blood or LSD. Yeah. Your ass is not coming down for a long time, kid.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think. I never open my eyes because I don't want it to end, but there is kind of like a safe word, so to speak, where like at any moment if you're like, okay, I'm overstimulated here or whatever, you just like open your eyes and you're just like, oh cool, there's a dresser, there's a dog, it's just gone.
Yeah, you can just roll away from it, cover your eyes.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And as you were talking about how, it's a way to have a psychedelic experience without taking anything, it's like these things would be amazing in rehabs.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Where people are super depressed and anxious and just totally whacked out from years of wrecking themselves.
Absolutely.
Where it's so uplifting, like mood wise. And that's something you really need if you want to sustain, abstinence too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I have a really wacky idea right now. It's going to be wacky to especially one person in the room. So my friend Ashley is sitting here. She's been hanging out. She restarted Instagram for me and she had this experience with us. Mm-hmm. And you can say no, it'll be fine because I only used your first name. It won't even be embarrassing. Would you get on the mic and explain just cold, obviously I have not warned her, what your experience was like? Yeah, sure. You would? Okay, come over here. You're going to take my mic. Okay. I've never done this on the show before, but I just had the idea.
Awesome.
So we have like a real, you can sit right there. We have a real newbie that just had this experience just randomly. She came over. I was like, dude, you got to come over. Allisyn's coming. It's going to be this rad thing. Just trust me. It's safe. It's awesome. And she trusted me and I think had a really positive experience. So I'm going to put the mic on you and you can tell us what it was like.
Thank you. Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, this is nice. Okay. Well, it was actually pretty cool earlier when you were talking about your first experience, mm-hmm. because when we were up there earlier, kind of shared a little bit, and I was still kind of in the moment of like feeling it and absorbing it and taking it all in, really excited about everything. But when you had mentioned that you felt like a spirit came to you, mm-hmm. the same thing happened during that longer period where we were experiencing. Mm-hmm. And I, it was just really cool because at one point it's the kaleidoscope images, the colors, the almost like geometry coming in and out and constantly like shaping itself. And then I said earlier, it felt like I was in a dream where I kind of like the base of like my peripherals was, I don't know, moving, constantly changing shapes and forms. But then I saw like outer space, like the stars and everything. Mm-hmm. And then at one moment during that, I felt, I saw a presence kind of like on the right side of my vision. Mm-hmm. And I just saw someone there and it was very comforting, not like, oh, what's that? Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then again, I got so excited about what that was, almost like a control sort of thing. Like, should I prepare myself? Should I be like looking somewhere? Should I act differently? And it just went away. But that moment kind of like made me realize like letting go in a way and not trying to fixate or control this experience that I'm having and just being really open. I think that's kind of what allowed me to feel that presence there. And afterwards too, I felt like this pulsating warmth right in the center. I wasn't sure. I was like, is it the light that's doing that? But when you had mentioned it earlier too, I was like, oh, I did have that and I wanted to mention it and I didn't. But yeah, at first my eyes were flickering like crazy. I wasn't even sure if they were like opening or not. And I was trying to keep them closed as long as possible. And then towards the very end, my eyes just I felt like my entire energy levels were just different. I felt really calm, really in my body, like really connected to myself and my breath. And there was just a lot of ease in how I was feeling, which was really amazing. Because like I had said before, this is all very new. And I felt like there was so much excitement and I was trying to contain it. And it just felt very jittery, sort of. And then, this is kind of actually it's been a couple hours now. And I feel like that feeling is still, like I'm still in it. And it's amazing. So, I hope that
Thank you so much for sharing. That was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. It was, I can't wait to do it again, hopefully, sometime soon.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thank you.
Yay.
Thank you.
Well, there we go. I think I'm going to make a habit of that, you guys. I'm going to just be like putting people on blast that are hanging around while I'm recording.
Yeah, it's
like,
great.
Hey, jump on the podcast. I once did something similar when I did the stem cell episode in Salt Lake City at Docere Clinics with Amy Killen and Harry Allisyn, and I met a listener there who's like, "Hey, I live here. I'll show you where this great hot springs is." And she did, and we were driving down the road, and I was like, "Hey, be on my podcast," and I just interviewed her randomly. That was a long time ago. So thank you for having the courage to be spontaneous with me, Ashley. And that was a really fun experience to hear your account of it, because it was like your first time. You had no expectations other than me just going like, "It's cool. It's kind of trippy. Do it." So that was rad. All right. You gave your shout outs on the website. Mention your Instagram again.
Traveling Light Machine.
Traveling Light Machine. And then I'm going to ask you my final question, which is, let me get Cookie off the recorder. Come here, monkey. Don't click stop now. My final question is, I've learned a lot from you today, and so has my audience. So who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced your life and your work that they might be able to go research and also learn from?
Interesting. Well, if you're interested in this kind of thing, I think I've actually really learned a lot. I would give the first shout out to the inventors of the light, especially Dr. Dirk Prockel, a neurologist. And together Dirk and Engelbert put together this document called neuropsycholysis, which is really interesting. It's about like a procedure for working with people with the light and asking certain questions to kind of just like open more spaciousness before the experience. But yeah, I would really like to, thank them and point towards the writings and research that they have done so far, and just the way that they work with people, and also, their patience in working with me and in my own process of moving from kind of this very left brain intellectual, like wanting to have all the answers, to like really opening up into like the presence of being. And then in terms of other teachers or things to look up, I don't know. I would just almost say there's been so many different teachers. I followed many different kind of lineages, and whether it's spiritual or whatnot. But I would just say that, like instead of looking externally, I would invite people to look within for more answers. And, really trusting your own wisdom and giving yourself that time. So I think when we really, there's a lot of, again, like this looking externally to figure things out. And like one of the kind of greatest things that I've realized is, instead of like asking my friends for advice or like looking to follow people or, oh, they're doing that, I should do that kind of energy. It's just some of the deepest and most worthwhile moments of my own healing process and my own journey have just been like cut out all the noise. You know, you can read all these inspirational teachings, you know, but take everything with a grain of salt and like really feel in what resonates with you on a really deep level, not just like, oh, that person's, you know, like famous, or like, oh, you know, it's the Dalai Lama, I should believe everything they said. Like, you know, it's like really like tune into your own intuition. Like, you are your best teacher. And it's like, you know, like, and when you actually just take that time to stop and really listen, you know, there might be like 3 different voices. The first one might be like, oh, you don't know anything. And then the second one is like, how can I trust what I know? You know, but then if you just like keep listening, there comes like an even deeper, maybe a quieter voice that can offer you some like incredible insight. And I think that's what I recommend.
I love that. That's funny. I always try to get people to, like, I want to corral you and confine you into like 3 people we can Google and go learn from. And then someone will be like, my grandmother or Jesus Christ. I'm like, okay. But yeah, you are your own guru, your own inner teacher. And with that, I'm going to let you get away with 2. Normally I demand 3, but the second one was so good, we're going to roll that into me, myself, and I as the 3. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's great to see you. And thanks for bringing this incredible experience and technology to the world. It's
Thank
a real
you for
gift.
having me and for sharing with so many people.